How did ancient cities stay clean without plumbing? How did entire communities share restroom without getting sick? And who were the people who kept everything flowing from the shadows? This is not just a story about sanitation, it's about survival, ritual, and quiet revolution, flushed into history's dark corners and forgotten. Tonight, we travel through time into the steamy courtyards of the Indus Valley, the perfumed latrines of Egypt, and the misty alleys of ancient China. This is not just history, it's history whispered into dreams. Before we begin, please consider subscribing and leave a like and a gentle comment. It helps these peaceful tales reach others who need rest. Now let's begin. Imagine, if you will, stepping back in time to a bustling medieval town in the 1200s. The air would greet the senses not with the clean filtered scents of our modern world, but with a rich, complex tapestry of odours. This was not necessarily a world of unmitigated stench, as popular imagination often suggests, but rather a different olfactory experience, one that medieval people navigated with senses acutely attuned to their environment. The common perception that medieval Europe was universally filthy and perpetually stinking is often an exaggeration. While certainly not clean by today's exacting standards, the inhabitants of this era did make considerable efforts to manage their environment and personal smells, demonstrating a practical approach to cleanliness within their technological limitations. The very streets themselves would have offered a blend of smells, a constant sensory backdrop to daily life. One might detect the earthy scent of unpaved roads, the occasional waft of animal manure from the ubiquitous presence of horses and other livestock, and the comforting, yet pervasive, smoky aroma of wood fires emanating from hearths and bakeries. This collection of natural and human-generated odours formed a unique atmospheric signature for each town and city. A central belief shaping the medieval understanding of health and environment was the miasma theory. This was the idea that disease was carried by foul, corrupted air, often detectable by its unpleasant smell. This theory, though scientifically incorrect by modern microbiological standards, profoundly influenced how people perceived and attempted to manage their surroundings. The connection between bad smells and illness provided a practical, albeit misinformed, incentive to mitigate these odours. It was not merely about comfort, it was believed to be a matter of survival, a way to ward off unseen ailments. This foundational belief helps to understand why, despite the challenges, medieval people were quite aware of unpleasant odours and actively sought to reduce them. Historical records from cities like York, for instance, indicate that citizens made considerable efforts to keep streets clean, and the stench from dung heaps or blocked gutters was not considered acceptable, highlighting a societal desire for order and a cleaner environment. This particular aspect illuminates that medieval hygiene practices were not born from ignorance or indifference, but rather from a rational system based on the best available scientific understanding of the time. The prevailing medical belief in miasma provided a strong causal link between foul odours and disease, which in turn drove practical urban sanitation efforts. The objective was not to eliminate germs, a concept unknown to them, but to remove the visible and olfactory signs of corruption in the air, which they believed would prevent illness. This perspective shifts the understanding from a simplistic medieval people were dirty to a more nuanced view. Medieval people were actively trying to be clean, but within a different scientific framework and with the tools available to them. Beyond general waste, specific industries contributed unique and often potent smells to the urban tapestry. Tanneries, for instance, were particularly notorious for their pungent contributions, utilising copious amounts of urine, dog excrement, and stale beer in their processes. The powerful effluvium from tanneries in Nottingham was so strong it was said to repel rats, an unintended, yet significant, benefit that might have reduced incidents of plague in that specific area. Butchers, too, added to the sensory experience, with the rich stench of blood and offal from their slaughtering activities, which were often conducted directly in the streets, further contributing to the complex urban aroma. Open sewers, such as London's infamous Fleet Ditch, which was essentially a small river used for dumping night soil and industrial byproducts, would have been a constant source of strong odours, especially when clogged and overflowing. Even seemingly innocuous industries had their distinct scents. Harlem, for example, was characterised by the smell of buttermilk and malt, owing to its prominent bleaching and beer industries. Smell, in this period, was not merely a physical sensation, it carried profound moral and social dimensions. A sweet smell was associated with holiness, akin to honey or a multitude of flowers, while foul odours were linked to disease, low social standing, and moral corruption. This meant that personal scent was not just a matter of comfort, but a subtle yet powerful social signal. If an individual smelled decent, it might imply wealth or saintliness. Conversely, if one did not, it simply meant blending in with the common experience. This understanding of scent as a multi-layered social and moral indicator highlights that personal and environmental scent was a complex social language. It was not just about masking unpleasantness, it was about projecting virtue, status, and health. The odour of sanctity, attributed to saints, suggests a spiritual ideal that transcended mere physical cleanliness, while the recorded wild animal smell of King Louis XIII was remarkable precisely because it deviated from the expected norm for someone of his standing, implying an expectation of better personal scent among the elite. This reveals a sophisticated, albeit different, cultural understanding of personal presentation and social communication through the sense of smell. Despite the pervasive odours that characterised medieval towns, people developed a certain tolerance, much like how modern urban populations become accustomed to city noise. However, this did not signify obliviousness. Rather, their baseline for what constituted normal was simply different from ours today. To combat personal body odour and the general environmental pungency, medieval people employed various creative methods. The pomander, a small hollow ball filled with aromatic herbs and spices such as cloves, cinnamon, lavender, or musk, was a popular accessory worn around the neck or tucked into clothing. These acted as personal, portable air filters designed to politely overpower less pleasant smells. Scented sachets were often worn in bodices, and herbs like rosemary or marjoram were sometimes braided directly into hair. For those with greater means, perfumes imported from the Middle East or Italy, crafted from rose oil or civet, a substance extracted from a cat-like animal, were applied by dabbing. Natural remedies were also widely used. Alum powder, a naturally occurring mineral salt with mild antibacterial and astringent properties, was applied, as were chalk, vinegar rinses, or crushed herbs like sage, mint, and rosemary. The simple logic behind these applications was to smell better than you, even if the result was a scent akin to a salad. The introduction of alcohol distillation in the early 1300s, influenced by Arab practices, marked a significant turning point, leading to new, lighter alcohol-based fragrances, such as Queen of Hungary Water, a blend of rosemary and alcohol, which was used for rubbing on the body. Additionally, dusting powders made from ground rice, orris root known for its violet scent, and fragranced with cloves or lavender were applied to the body after drying. These methods, while not eliminating sweat, were focused on managing the stench, aiming to create a more agreeable, floral stew meat aroma rather than just stew meat. This highlights that despite the pervasive background odours, there was a societal expectation of managing personal scent, especially among the elite. The widespread use of pomanders and perfumes indicates a conscious effort to navigate the olfactory landscape, revealing a complex social dynamic where body odour was a recognised issue, leading to a cultural negotiation between natural bodily emissions, environmental factors, and a desire for more pleasant or virtuous smells. It was not about eliminating odour, but about controlling its social impact. This desire for pleasant smells and effective remedies drove demand for exotic ingredients, influencing economic patterns and cultural exchange. This demonstrates that hygiene was not just a local affair, but had broader economic and cultural implications, reflecting a sophisticated, interconnected world. The perception of bathing in the Middle Ages was far more nuanced than often portrayed. Contrary to the popular myth that medieval people never bathed, evidence suggests a more complex reality. In the early medieval period, bathing was actually considered beneficial, with monasteries even maintaining bathhouses, reflecting lingering Roman traditions of communal soaking and scrubbing. This practice, however, underwent a significant transformation by the 13th century. The idea of full-body bathing began to shift from being perceived as healthy to being considered hazardous. This change was driven by a combination of fear, superstition, and a fundamental misunderstanding of human physiology, particularly the prevailing medical theory of humours. The dominant belief was that hot water opened the pores, which was thought to allow illness and disease to seep in. This led to a mindset where bathing during an outbreak, such as the looming threat of the Black Death, though its full impact was felt more prominently in the 14th century, the groundwork for this fear was laid earlier, was seen as an act that could invite death itself. In this evolving worldview, water was not always seen as cleansing but potentially treacherous. Consequently, staying dry was increasingly perceived as safer, holier, and more modest, influencing personal hygiene choices across society. This particular aspect illuminates a complex interplay of medical theory, religious doctrine, and social practice in shaping hygiene. The shift from bathing as healthy to hazardous is directly linked to the humoral theory's belief that open pores invite disease. Simultaneously, the Church's condemnation of mixed bathing and associated immorality led to the closure of public baths. This reveals a complex causal chain where the scientific understanding or misunderstanding of the body, combined with powerful religious morality, created a societal environment where a once common practice became increasingly suspect. This was not a simple decline in cleanliness, but a redefinition of what cleanliness meant in the context of perceived health risks and spiritual purity. The impact of disease further solidified these fears, leading to practical closures and a widespread re-evaluation of bathing's role. Public bathhouses, often referred to as stews due to their steamy atmosphere, were once vibrant social hubs. Inspired by lingering Roman influence, these establishments offered warm water, communal tubs, and a place for townsfolk to soak, steam, and chat, much like a medieval spa day. In the 13th century, these facilities were quite common and popular. Paris, for example, boasted over 32 bathhouses by the 13th century, and Southwark, a town across the Thames from London, had 18 hot baths available. These establishments offered a range of services, including hot baths, steam rooms, massage, food and music, functioning as communal wellness centres. Mixed gender bathing was not unheard of, particularly in regions like Germany or Italy, where attitudes were somewhat more relaxed, and families sometimes attended together. However, by the 13th century, many bathhouses began to acquire a scandalous reputation. They became known for multitasking, blurring the line between hygiene and illicit companionship, with some effectively operating as brothels. The Church played a complex role in this narrative, while some early Christian figures and monastic orders actually encouraged hygiene and even maintained baths for charity, serving pilgrims and the poor. The Church generally condemned public nudity and the sexual misconduct associated with these bathhouses. This moral disapproval, combined with the growing fear of disease transmission, particularly once the Black Death arrived, though its peak was in the 14th century, the fear was already building, led to many bathhouses being shut down permanently. The decline of public baths in Western Europe continued into the 16th century, further influenced by more puritanical religious views. The spread of diseases like syphilis, which emerged in the late 15th century, and dwindling wood supplies needed for heating the vast quantities of water. Bathing habits varied significantly across social classes in 13th century Europe. For the nobles and the wealthy, bathing was a luxury, though not as frequent as modern daily showers. They had servants to lug in cauldrons of boiling water, which would then be poured into large wooden tubs, often lined with a linen sheet and sprinkled with fragrant herbs like lavender, sage, or other local botanicals. These baths were typically prepared in the privacy of a bedroom or near a fireplace, though privacy was sometimes optional depending on one's status or inclination. Some even shared their tubs with spouses, a practice that might seem unusual today, but was part of their intimate reality. For peasants and the poor, bathing was a more utilitarian affair, usually taking place in rivers, streams, barrels, or any container that could hold water and was readily accessible. Their bathing was often about efficiency, sometimes combining personal washing with laundry or even the cleaning of animals. In the harsh winter months, full body bathing took a backseat to survival, becoming a rare event as people prioritized warmth and food over extensive cleanliness. Monastic communities, on the other hand, often maintained scheduled washing routines, sometimes more for spiritual purity than strict sanitation. However, even their practices were subject to questioning as the general societal attitude towards bathing shifted. The frequency of full-body immersion varied widely. While some sources suggest daily ablutions focusing on hands, face, mouth, neck, and armpits for basic presentability, full-body soaks were less common. Some accounts indicate weekly bathing for most, or even once a season for others, particularly among the less affluent. This demonstrates that bathing was a spectrum of practice, not an absence. While full-body immersion was rare, partial washes were common. Public baths were widespread, but private baths were a luxury. Frequency varied from daily ablutions to seasonal full baths. This contradicts the simplistic myth of medieval people didn't bathe. Instead, it shows a nuanced reality where hygiene was practiced on a spectrum, adapted to social class, available resources, and prevailing beliefs. The emphasis shifted from full immersion to more practical, targeted cleaning methods, demonstrating adaptability rather than outright neglect. The existence of numerous public bathhouses, even with their controversies, indicates a persistent societal need and desire for communal washing spaces. Herbs and various additives were commonly incorporated into bath water, not just for fragrance but for their perceived medicinal benefits, aligning with the principles of humoral theory. These included well-known plants like lavender, sage, rosemary, mint, thyme, and chamomile. Even more unusual additions, such as pine needles, were used. For instance, some superstitious beliefs led to practices like boiling a fox and bathing in the resulting decoction, which was believed to cure paralysis. Influential medical texts, such as those by Ibn Sina, a major figure in medieval medicine, recommended aromatic baths for various urological and genital disorders, and juniper baths were prescribed to ease allergic skin itch. These herbal infusions were thought to soothe, cleanse, and balance the body's humours, even if the primary physical cleaning was performed with cloths rather than prolonged soaking. This highlights the economic and social significance of water access and heating. Wealthy people had servants to lug and heat water, while the poor used rivers or barrels. Heating water was costly and time-consuming. Public bathhouses often utilised heat from bakeries. This indicates that hygiene was not just a cultural or religious matter, but a significant economic and logistical challenge. Access to and heating of water were major barriers to frequent full-body bathing for the majority. This economic reality shaped the methods of hygiene, favouring partial washes and communal facilities that could leverage shared resources, rather than indicating a lack of desire for cleanliness. When full-body immersion became suspect due to the prevailing belief that hot water opened the pores and thus invited disease, medieval people adapted their hygiene practices. They turned to the sponge bath or partial wash as their primary daily routine for personal cleanliness. This was a practical and adaptable method, crucial for maintaining a basic level of hygiene in a world without modern plumbing or understanding of germ theory. They did not possess the soft, mass-produced sponges familiar to us today. Instead, they utilized linen cloths, which were soaked in warm water, herbal infusions, or vinegar. With these cloths, they would wipe themselves down, concentrating on what they considered high-traffic areas of the body: hands, face, armpits, and occasionally the feet. This focused approach was about achieving a state of being just clean enough to be presentable in daily life, or as one historical account colourfully puts it, to not scare the livestock. For the wealthier members of society, these partial washes were often performed by attendants, who would meticulously heat water and mix in fragrant herbs like rosemary or marjoram for their masters or mistresses. Peasants, on the other hand, would boil water over a fire and ladle it out into bowls to perform the same essential cleansing, albeit with less ceremony and more exposure to drafts. The unsung hero of medieval hygiene was undoubtedly linen undergarments. These garments were worn close to the body, beneath the heavier and less washable outer layers of wool and fur. Linen was highly valued for its breathable, absorbent, and surprisingly durable qualities. The ingenious logic behind their widespread use was elegantly simple: wash the linen, not the person. Given that scrubbing one's own body was considered risky due to the pervasive fears of plague and disease, scrubbing a shirt was deemed perfectly safe and effective. People might go for weeks without a full bath, but they would regularly change their underlayer, sometimes even twice a week, a practice considered practically saintly by medieval standards. Linen's exceptional ability to absorb sweat and grime meant that changing undergarments frequently was the closest equivalent to modern hygiene practices. While an outer tunic might be crusty, a fresh undershirt was a clear mark of relative cleanliness and personal care. The cleanliness of one's linen shirt thus became a subtle but powerful status signal. A white and relatively clean linen garment indicated that a person had their life together, while grey, crusty or mould-sprouting linen suggested poverty, possession, or recent resurrection. Women's linen shifts were essential, protecting outer garments from sweat and, perhaps more importantly, from the smell of sweat. Acting as a medieval version of a chemical-free freshener, knights wore linen under their armour to prevent discomfort and chafing, and even peasants, despite their limited means, wore linen tunics, though these were often patched and threadbare. This highlights the significant role of the linen revolution as a cornerstone of practical medieval hygiene. The explicit emphasis on wash the linen, not the person, and the widespread use of linen undergarments across all social classes demonstrate an intelligent, low-resource solution to managing body grime and odour without frequent full-body immersion. This understanding challenges the simplistic dirty medievals narrative, instead revealing a resourceful and intelligent adaptation to environmental and economic constraints, showcasing a different but effective form of cleanliness. Beyond water-based washes, medieval people also employed dry cleaning methods for personal hygiene. This involved rubbing the entire body down with a clean, dry cloth. Modern historical reenactors who have experimented with this method have found it surprisingly effective, as the cloth fibers buff away dead skin cells and absorb excess oil, leaving behind a cleaner, fresher layer of skin. This method was particularly practical for daily use, especially when access to clean water was limited during travel or in the cold winter months. It also offered the significant advantage of not requiring privacy, as it could be performed discreetly beneath one's clothing. Soap, which was typically harsh in its medieval formulation, often made from animal fat and lye, was generally not used directly on the skin for personal washing due to its abrasive nature, which could cause irritation or even chemical burns. Instead, soap was primarily used on the cloths themselves to remove the oil and grime absorbed from the body, effectively cleaning the cleaning implement rather than the skin directly. This reveals the pragmatism of good enough hygiene in a resource-constrained world. The focus on sponge baths for high-traffic areas, the use of dry cloths, and the acceptance of a basic level of cleanliness demonstrate a practical, rather than ideal, approach to personal hygiene. Given the labour, cost, and perceived health risks associated with full bathing, medieval people optimised their efforts for maximum impact with minimum resource expenditure. This illustrates a resourceful and intelligent adaptation to environmental and economic realities, rather than a simple lack of care for cleanliness. The cleanliness of one's linen shirt as a visible aspect of one's attire became a primary social indicator. The statement that a white and relatively clean linen shirt signaled that people assumed you had your life together is particularly telling. This implies that the visible cleanliness of clothing, rather than the unseen cleanliness of the body itself, was a crucial social cue. This uncovers a subtle but significant social dynamic. In a world where direct personal hygiene was challenging and often private, the cleanliness of one's outer appearance, particularly the undergarments that might peek through or whose freshness could be inferred, became a proxy for status, diligence, and even virtue. This means that social presentation was maintained through indirect means, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of social cues within their unique hygienic context. The popular image of medieval people with matted, unwashed hair is largely a misconception. While they did not possess modern shampoo or engage in frequent full-body bathing, they did, in fact, care for their hair with considerable diligence. Hair care in the Middle Ages was a clever combination of styling choices, the strategic use of head wraps, and the consistent application of combs and brushes to maintain cleanliness and order. This aspect of medieval life serves as a microcosm of adaptive hygiene. The direct statements that medieval people did care for their hair but did not wash it frequently with harsh soaps are central. Instead, they relied on styling, head coverings, and combs. This demonstrates a highly adaptive approach to hygiene, where the method was dictated by the available technology, such as harsh soaps and potentially contaminated water, and prevailing beliefs, such as the notion that hot water could weaken the brain. Rather than neglecting hair, they developed sophisticated alternative methods that prioritized cleanliness through absorption by linen coverings, mechanical removal of dirt and pests with combs, and the distribution of natural oils through brushing. This illustrates a resourceful and intelligent response to environmental constraints, showcasing a different but effective form of cleanliness that was well suited to their era. Actual hair washing was an infrequent event, often occurring only once every 3 weeks for women, largely due to the immense effort involved in heating and transporting water, as well as concerns about using potentially contaminated water. When washing did occur, it was typically performed with home-brewed concoctions. A common choice was a form of lye soap made from wood ash and animal fat. While effective at cutting through grease, this substance was notably harsh on the scalp. For those seeking a gentler approach, egg yolks mixed with warm water were sometimes used as a cleanser, a method that remarkably influenced later Edwardian hair wash recipes centuries later. Other less conventional rinses included beer, which, if nothing else, might have helped with lice while imparting a distinct aroma, or vinegar infusions with rosemary or lavender, which served to mask other smells and create the illusion of care. Medical texts of the period, such as the 12th century Trotula and the writings of the 13th century physician Henri de Mondeville, contained detailed recipes for hair washes, conditioners, and even hair colours, indicating a documented and sophisticated interest in hair care. The temperature of the water was also a matter of consideration. Hot water was believed to weaken the brain, while cold water could supposedly bring the plague, making lukewarm water the elusive, preferred temperature, assuming one had the fuel and patience to achieve it. Brushing and combing were routine, and arguably the most crucial aspects of daily hair hygiene. Combs, crafted from materials like bone, wood, or horn, were common personal items, and were often elaborately carved, representing a rare moment of elegance in an otherwise practical reality. These combs featured fine, closely packed teeth, designed not just for styling, but, critically, for the removal of lice and their eggs. Thorough brushing, often performed twice a day, played a dual role. It helped distribute the hair's natural oils from roots to ends, preventing excessive greasiness at the scalp and dryness at the tips, effectively cleaning and conditioning simultaneously. Furthermore, brushing the scalp helped to exfoliate away dead skin and build-up, contributing to overall cleanliness. This practice is, in fact, the origin of the enduring advice to brush long hair with 100 strokes. In addition to combs, linen cloths were also used to rub the hair and scalp clean, absorbing excess oil and dirt, much like the function of head coverings. This reveals the hidden labour of hair maintenance. While full washing was infrequent, daily brushing twice a day, changing head coverings daily, and elaborate styling for noble women are repeatedly mentioned. This indicates that despite the apparent lack of frequent washing, by modern standards, medieval hair care involved significant, often invisible, daily labour. The time and effort invested in brushing, braiding, and maintaining headwear would have been substantial, especially for women across social classes. This challenges the notion of low-maintenance medieval hair and highlights the constant, diligent effort required to keep it presentable and relatively clean. Head coverings played a vital role in maintaining hair cleanliness and were integral to medieval hairstyles. Hair was frequently braided and pinned up, then covered by clean linen veils or caps, which were changed daily or even more often. These coverings served a practical purpose by preventing external dirt, dust, and smoke from settling on the hair, while also absorbing excess natural oils and sweat. Long hair was often worn in braids and pinned to the head, a protective style that reduced tangling and breakage, similar to protective styles in modern hair care. Hairstyles also served as indicators of social class and marital status. Noble women, for instance, might spend hours on elaborate braids, coils, and veils, reflecting their status and adherence to societal norms, while young girls and unmarried women typically wore their hair loose and uncovered. The emphasis on covering hair, especially for married women, was also deeply linked to notions of modesty and virtue, reflecting the Church's views on hair as a potential source of temptation. This demonstrates the intertwined nature of hygiene, social status, and morality in hair practices. Hair was a sign of social status, noble women spent hours on it, and covering it was linked to modesty and virtue. Untidy hair could even lead to charges of depravity. This shows that hair hygiene was not merely a personal choice, but deeply embedded in societal norms and moral expectations. The way hair was kept, styled, and covered communicated social standing, marital status, and adherence to religious values, adding a layer of social pressure and cultural significance to what we might consider a simple, personal care routine. In the 13th century, the pursuit of a sparkling smile was not the medieval ideal. Rather, the primary objective for oral hygiene was the more pragmatic goal of retaining as many teeth as possible. Despite the absence of modern dental tools and practices, medieval people did make discernible efforts toward maintaining oral cleanliness. The toothbrush, as we know it, was still centuries away from invention. Instead, individuals commonly used linen rags to rub their teeth clean, often soaking these cloths in abrasive substances such as salt, crushed mint, or even burnt rosemary ash to enhance their cleaning power. Another common method involved the use of chewing sticks, which were thin twigs from trees like hazel or elm. These twigs were frayed at one end to create a brush-like effect, then chewed until the fibres separated, allowing them to be used to scrub the teeth, an early, organic, and biodegradable form of toothbrush. To combat bad breath, people would chew on aromatic items such as fennel seeds, cloves, or cardamom, the choice often depending on what they could afford or acquire from the local spice rack. Wealthier individuals might elevate this practice by rinsing their mouths with more refined liquids like vinegar, wine, or even myrrh water, adding a touch of sophistication to their oral care. A rudimentary form of toothpaste also existed, typically composed of powdered charcoal, crushed eggshells, and oyster shell ash, mixed with honey or oil to form a gritty paste that, if nothing else, left the mouth feeling sandblasted. Medieval medical treatises further described best practices for cleaning teeth, including the use of rough cloths and rags to remove food remnants after each meal, and provided recipes for various pastes, powders, and mouthwashes. Ingredients for these concoctions often included ginger, mint, parsley, sage, marjoram, oregano, cinnamon, and pepper, applied topically or infused in rose water, wine, or vinegar. Toothache was the most commonly treated dental problem in medieval medicine, and its understanding was deeply rooted in the prevailing humoral theory. It was believed that dental pain resulted from an imbalance of warm and cold humours originating from the brain or stomach. A prevalent belief, dating back to Sumerian texts from 5000 BC, was the concept of the tooth worm, thought to cause pain with its movements. Treatments for this perceived affliction included inhaling the smoke from burning henbane or chamomile seeds, or applying acidic substances to purportedly kill the worms. Dental caries or cavities and fistulae were addressed with herbal concoctions applied as a paste within the tooth cavity, or by cauterizing the rotten dental pulp and sealing it with wax, which effectively destroyed the nerve supply. Despite these challenges, medieval people were not necessarily toothless. Their diets were generally lower in processed sugar compared to later eras, and many rural populations exhibited better dental health than modern snackers. However, when rot did set in, it progressed rapidly, and the available remedies were often limited to divine intervention. This highlights a paradox of good dental health amidst rudimentary care. Snippets indicate that medieval people often had quite healthy teeth due to lower sugar diets, yet dental care was rudimentary at best. Toothaches were common, and extractions were brutal. This reveals a crucial distinction between preventative health diet and reactive treatment dental care. The absence of widespread processed sugars naturally protected teeth from the most common modern dental issue. However, when problems did arise, the lack of advanced medical knowledge and tools meant that interventions were painful and risky. This suggests that dental health was more a product of lifestyle than active, effective hygiene practices, showcasing a unique historical context for oral well-being. The role of dentists was often filled by barber surgeons who, on their off days, performed a range of procedures alongside their primary duties of hair cutting and bloodletting. Tooth extraction was a common, albeit simple and brutal, solution for loose, infected, or merely annoying teeth. The approach was often to yank it out. This procedure was typically performed without anesthetic, relying instead on a wooden chair, a strong grip, and a few words to God. Extraction was considered a dangerous last resort, as the unrefined metal tooth extractors of the time could easily break teeth, leave embedded roots, or damage surrounding teeth and bone. Infections resulting from mishandled operations were a significant and often fatal risk. Early European extraction tools included the pelican, so named for its resemblance to a bird's beak, which was used from the 14th through the 18th centuries. This tool operated by placing a claw over the tooth and a fulcrum against the gum to lever the tooth out. While rudimentary, some specialized dental practitioners, known as tooth drawers, began to emerge by the later medieval period. For the very wealthy, early forms of false teeth, crafted from materials like ivory, precious metals, or even human or animal bone, existed, though primarily for aesthetic purposes rather than functional chewing. This illustrates the integrated but unspecialized nature of medieval medical practice. Barbers often served as dentists, performing extractions alongside hair cutting and bloodletting. Medical literature focused on herbal remedies and charms for toothaches. This indicates that medical professions in the 13th century were not as specialized as they are today. The barber surgeon's role as a jack of all trades points to a practical approach to healthcare where individuals with manual dexterity and sharp tools addressed a range of physical ailments. This lack of specialization, while efficient in terms of accessible services, also meant that dental care was often reactive, painful, and prone to complications due to limited anatomical and microbiological understanding. The psychological impact of dental pain and the limited options for relief in the medieval period were profound. Descriptions of toothache in historical texts refer to it as among the worst of tortures and an inferno of pain. These vivid accounts stand in stark contrast to the simple, brutal solution of yank it out. The widespread appeal to supernatural forces through charms and incantations for relief from toothache underscores the desperation felt in the face of such suffering. This emphasizes the profound psychological burden of dental issues in the medieval period. The extreme pain, coupled with the brutal and risky nature of the only effective treatment extraction without anesthesia, would have instilled deep fear and desperation. The reliance on charms and divine intervention further highlights the helplessness felt in the face of such suffering, bringing to light a significant aspect of daily life that is often overlooked in discussions of medieval hygiene. If medieval hair had a motto, it might be flammable but fragrant, but the daily reality for many was often far more itchy. People in the 13th century were constantly playing host to an entire travelling circus of lice, fleas, and mites. Lice were such an everyday nuisance that they were basically treated like unwanted roommates. Their presence was a fact of life, affecting rich and poor, pious and drunk alike, making them the true equalizers of medieval society. Fleas posed another pervasive problem, particularly for those sleeping on straw mattresses or living in close proximity to animals. Medieval people, like their ancient counterparts, generally believed that these parasites spontaneously generated from dirt, sweat, or miasmus, rather than hatching from eggs. This fundamental misunderstanding of their origin naturally influenced their approaches to treatment and prevention. This highlights the acceptance of pests as a form of societal adaptation. The consistent description of lice as unwanted roommates and true equalizers implies a widespread and inescapable presence. The fact that some saints embrace them further suggests a cultural normalization. This indicates that medieval society, facing a pervasive and difficult to eliminate problem, developed a form of collective tolerance and adaptation. While efforts were made to manage pests, their constant presence meant that a certain level of infestation was simply part of daily life. This acceptance was not passive resignation, but a pragmatic response to a reality they could not fully control with their limited scientific understanding and tools. It underscores the resilience and adaptability of medieval people in the face of persistent discomfort. Various methods were employed for the detection and removal of these persistent nuisances. Combing was a primary tool. Lice combs, often crafted from bone or wood with fine, closely packed teeth, were common personal items. These combs were specifically designed to rake out the critters and their eggs, a method that, remarkably, remains effective for lice removal even today. Heat treatment was another strategy. Boiling clothes or baking them near a fire was a common method to kill lice, though it came with the inherent risk of burning one's only tunic. Medieval illustrations depicting people holding up their shirts near a flame often portray this very act of pest execution. Shaving one's head offered an effective, albeit dramatic, solution particularly favoured by monks, or those who could adopt a bald look. While wigs were sometimes worn on top, they could ironically become their own lice hotels if not properly cleaned. People also turned to various herbal repellents and aromatic substances to deter pests. Lavender flowers and cedarwood were often worn on the person or placed near clothing, as some believed certain smells would encourage fleas to move on to someone's smelly air. Sachets, sometimes known as plague bags, and later as sweet bags, filled with ingredients like cedar pine sawdust, rosemary, and lavender, were worn around the neck or tucked into clothing to provide protection against parasites and bad airs. More unpleasant remedies included toxic ingredients like mercury or concoctions of vinegar and cheese whey, though the actual efficacy of these more extreme measures is debated by modern historians. This highlights the link between pest management and resourcefulness. Methods like boiling clothes, baking them near fires, using fine-toothed combs, and employing herbal sachets are detailed in historical accounts. These practices demonstrate ingenuity and resourcefulness in pest control, utilizing readily available materials and heat. The emphasis on mechanical removal and environmental modification shows a practical, hands-on approach. This illustrates that medieval people were not ignorant of pests, but were actively, if not always effectively, engaged in battling them using the knowledge and resources at their disposal. It underscores their cleverness in working within their limitations. The constant itching and scratching that resulted from these infestations were an inescapable part of medieval daily life, as common and accepted as taxes or the unavoidable experience of stepping in something unspeakable near the market stalls. While most ectoparasites, such as head lice, pose no direct health risk beyond irritation, severe infestations could lead to secondary infections from bites or excessive scratching. For the religiously devout, particularly monks and nuns, parasites sometimes served a different purpose. They were viewed as a reminder of the frailties of the flesh and were even embraced as a form of asceticism or devotion to God. Accounts of saints intentionally neglecting hygiene to be tormented by lice illustrate this unique perspective. The psychological impact of these pervasive pests, while not as dramatic or acutely terrifying as the Black Death, was a constant, low-level torment that significantly affected personal comfort and overall well-being. This points to the psychological burden of constant itching and the lack of true relief. The repeated mention of itching and the pervasive nature of pests suggest a significant, albeit often unstated, psychological impact. The lack of truly effective widespread treatments implies that full relief was rare. While not as dramatic as plague, the constant presence of biting, crawling insects would have contributed to chronic discomfort, disrupted sleep, and potentially exacerbated stress. The psychological impact goes beyond mere annoyance, representing a persistent background stressor that affected overall quality of life. This highlights a subtle but important aspect of medieval daily existence, where even minor irritations could accumulate into a significant burden. Sleeping arrangements in medieval homes further facilitated the spread of pests. Beds were often communal, with entire families or even guests sharing sleeping spaces, creating close proximity that allowed parasites to move easily from person to person. Early beds were simple piles of straw, leaves, or animal skins on the ground, which could be replaced regularly. Over time, large fabric bags, known as ticks, were made to encase straw, wool, or feathers, providing a more contained sleeping surface. Wealthier individuals enjoyed the luxury of feather beds and pillows, along with fur coverlets, though these softer, warmer materials were equally attractive to pests. A significant factor contributing to pest accumulation was that bed filling was typically changed only once a year, providing ample opportunity for infestations to thrive. To combat pests in bedding, various measures were employed: tightly woven mattress covers ticking, the use of insect-repellent herbs such as cedarwood, or storing bedding in cedar chests were common strategies. Some believed that certain smells repelled pests, leading to herbal sachets being tossed between sheets. Wealthier homes might even apply mercury ointment to bed joints to deter bugs, though they were unaware of the mercury vapor's toxicity. The term medieval toilet might seem optimistically applied, as the act of going to the bathroom in the 13th century was less about comfort and convenience and more about creative improvisation and significantly lowered expectations. The solutions for human waste disposal varied widely depending on social status and location, ranging from rudimentary outdoor practices to more elaborate, yet still imperfect, architectural features. For the elite, castles featured specialized facilities known as garderobes. These were essentially small closets with a hole in a stone bench, from which waste dropped straight down. The destination of this waste varied. Sometimes it fell into a moat, sometimes into a designated pit, and occasionally onto an unfortunate, unfenced patch of earth below. Garderobes were often strategically located high in castle towers, providing a degree of privacy and the added, if perhaps unintended, thrill of gravity. Some castle latrines were designed to empty directly into courtyards or rivers, and it was not uncommon for grander castles to feature multiple tiers of toilets, all sharing a common waste chute. Despite these architectural efforts, castle toilets were notoriously odorous, with records showing complaints even from powerful figures like King Henry III, who ordered costly refits due to the persistent bad smell. For peasants and those living in rural areas, toilet practices were far simpler. Most individuals did their business outdoors, in the woods, near a river, or discreetly behind a barn, often in proximity to a manure pile. Some villages had communal pits, essentially rudimentary outhouses with very low standards of privacy, where neighbours might engage in conversation mid-squat. In colder climates, for protection from the elements, latrines might be dug within stables or barns. In urban centres, private built-in toilets were less common, particularly in crowded areas. Instead, backhouses were sometimes constructed at the rear of lots, providing shared access for all inhabitants of a building. Public latrines, often referred to as siege houses in medieval English documents, were a necessity in cities where private facilities were scarce and public urination or defecation was forbidden. These communal facilities were frequently built over bridges or on quays, allowing waste to drop directly into running water, which facilitated disposal. London, for example, had at least 13 public latrines by the 15th century, many strategically located near the Thames or its tributaries. For nighttime needs, the chamber pot was an ubiquitous fixture found tucked under beds in homes across all social strata. Their contents were typically emptied in the morning, often into cesspits, or, notoriously, thrown out windows with a hearty shout of guard, low, meaning watch out for the water, to warn passers-by below. This practice, though explicitly forbidden and punishable by fines in some cities, was nonetheless common, particularly from high-rise buildings. Interestingly, urine collected in chamber pots was often saved for practical purposes, such as laundry, where its ammonia content acted as a bleach, or for industrial uses like leatherworking. A chair with a hole and a cover might be placed over the chamber pot to contain smells, offering a slight improvement in comfort and odour control. The management of waste presented significant challenges. Cesspits were common for collecting human waste, often timber or stone-lined pits dug into the ground. These pits required regular emptying by specialised labourers known as gong farmers or nightmen, a well-paid but undeniably unenviable job performed primarily under the cover of darkness. Cesspits were prone to overflowing if not properly maintained, leading to disputes between neighbours and environmental contamination. Rivers and open ditches frequently served as rudimentary sewers, with waste often channeled directly into them. While this method removed waste from immediate proximity, it also contaminated vital water sources. London's Fleet Ditch, for example, became so choked with tannery filth in the 13th century that it was no longer navigable. Despite the common perception of medieval cities as universally filthy, many had regulations aimed at improving street sanitation. City councils from the 13th to 15th centuries in various European regions explicitly forbade throwing any waste, including feces, urine, kitchen remains, or workshop trash, into the streets. House owners were often held responsible for keeping the portion of the street directly in front of their property clean. Muckrakers were hired labourers tasked with cleaning the streets, collecting filth, and dumping it outside city walls. Special cleanings were often ordered after market days and large festivities, which generated increased amounts of waste and horse manure. Fines were imposed for various waste-related offences, including butchers throwing offal into the streets. This highlights the constant battle between regulation and reality in urban sanitation. Snippets show clear regulations forbidding street dumping and requiring cleanliness, alongside evidence that these rules were often ignored or overwhelmed by the sheer volume of waste. The term guard, low, itself implies a common, albeit illegal, practice. This reveals a systemic challenge. Medieval authorities recognized the problem of waste and attempted to control it through legislation and hired labour, but the practicalities of a dense urban population without modern infrastructure meant that waste management was a perpetual struggle. The gap between ideal regulations and reality, overflowing ditches, occasional window dumping illustrates the limitations of medieval urban planning in the face of rapid population growth and technological constraints. It was not a lack of awareness, but a lack of effective solutions. General waste in medieval towns was less problematic than today, largely because fewer possessions meant less non-biodegradable garbage. Most waste was organic and biodegradable. Scrap wood was reused, food waste was fed to animals, especially the ubiquitous pigs, and broken pottery or heavily damaged textiles were typically disposed of in designated pits or even directly into latrines, which is why archaeological digs of latrine pits often yield interesting artifacts. Some hard waste, such as clay, gravel, or fruit stones, was even used as filler in building foundations. Designated dumping sites were often located outside city walls, and when pits filled up, trash was carted to these external sites. This illustrates waste as both a resource and a nuisance. Human and animal waste was used as fertilizer, urine for laundry and leatherworking, and other refuse for feeding pigs or building foundations. Yet this same waste caused foul odors and was linked to disease. This reveals a dual perception of waste in the medieval economy. On one hand, it was a valuable resource, meticulously recycled and reused due to the labour-intensive production processes of the era. On the other hand, it was a major source of environmental pollution and discomfort. This paradox shaped waste management strategies, balancing the economic utility of waste with the public health and aesthetic concerns it generated. It shows a highly integrated, albeit often smelly, circular economy. For personal cleansing after using the toilet, modern toilet paper did not exist. People had to make do with readily available alternatives such as rags, moss, straw, or grass. For those of more refined means, bits of wool or linen scraps might be used. In the harsh winter months, snow was even a possibility for this purpose. This highlights the social and economic hierarchy reflected in toilet facilities. Castles had garderobes, while peasants used woods or communal pits. Chamber pots were common across classes, but their disposal varied. Public latrines served the urban commoners. This reveals that access to and quality of toilet facilities were direct indicators of social status and wealth. The elaborate, albeit imperfect, systems in castles contrasted sharply with the basic, often public, arrangements for the majority. This underscores how even the most fundamental human needs were stratified by social hierarchy, with privacy and convenience being luxuries afforded to the elite. In medieval Europe, the act of doing laundry was far more than a mere chore. It was a full body workout, a significant community event, and a constant, arduous battle against the elements. The conveniences of modern washing machines and detergents were centuries away, meaning that achieving clean clothes demanded immense physical effort and ingenuity. This illuminates laundry as the primary vector of medieval hygiene. The repeated emphasis on the labour-intensive nature of laundry and the strategic use of linen undergarments are central. The core idea was wash the linen, not the person. This reveals that medieval hygiene, by necessity, focused more on the cleanliness of textiles than on the direct cleansing of the body. Laundry was not just a chore, it was a fundamental public health and social practice. This challenges the modern assumption that personal cleanliness begins with the body. demonstrating a different but equally valid approach where clean clothes acted as a barrier against grime and a signal of personal care. Most laundry was performed in rivers or streams, which, while providing a source of running water, often simultaneously served as sewers, livestock baths, and even occasional body disposal sites. The process typically began with soaking linens in a solution of lye or urine, often referred to as chamber lye. This substance was highly valued for its ammonia content, which effectively helped to lift stains and whiten fabric. While its smell was certainly less appealing than modern detergents, it proved remarkably effective for the task. After soaking, the soaked clothes were dragged to the water source, where they were rigorously scrubbed against wooden boards or large, flat stones, and then pounded repeatedly with paddles, a method known as fulling. This was far from a gentle wash. It was, in essence, a clothes interrogation, designed to physically beat the dirt out of the fabric. This laborious process could take many hours and often involved the collective effort of washerwomen, who were both feared and admired for their impressive arm strength and endurance. Following the washing, the clothes underwent a thorough rinsing and wringing by hand before being spread out to dry. This final stage was entirely reliant on good weather, with garments often laid across bushes, hedges, or stretched on lines between trees and peasant huts, contributing to what one might describe as the charming aesthetic of a never-ending yard sale in medieval villages. In periods of poor weather, indoor drying was an option if space permitted, often utilizing poles placed in front of a fire. Cleaning agents and stain removal techniques were equally rudimentary, yet effective. Homemade lye solutions derived from wood ashes or harsh black liquid soap were commonly used for washing. More refined and gentle Castile soap, imported from southern Europe or the Islamic world, was a coveted luxury reserved for the wealthy. Ammonia, produced by fermenting urine, was specifically employed for its bleaching properties. Additionally, natural plant-based agents such as soapwort or herbs like marjoram were sometimes added to the washwater to further cleanse and deodorize fabrics. Medieval households also possessed a surprising array of recipes for stain removal, ranging from simple methods like soaking a stain in verjuice, the juice of unripe grapes, to more complex, multi-day processes involving fuller's earth, ox gall, or even clean chicken feathers. The significance of linen clothing in medieval hygiene cannot be overstated. Linen undergarments were truly the unsung saviors of the era. Worn directly against the skin beneath heavier wool and fur outer layers, they effectively absorbed sweat and grime, acting as a protective barrier. The underlying logic was elegant and practical. Wash the linen, not the person. While individuals might go for weeks without a full bath, they would regularly change their underlayer, sometimes even twice a week, a frequency considered practically saintly by medieval standards. Linen was highly prized for its breathability, absorbency, and remarkable durability, and it laundered beautifully, becoming softer with each wash. Its superior ability to absorb sweat and body oils compared to cotton, which was less common in Europe at the time, meant linen garments could be worn for several uses before requiring cleaning, thereby saving labour and resources. The cleanliness of one's linen garment became a subtle but powerful status symbol. A white, fresh-smelling linen shift indicated presentability and suggested that one had their life together. Linen was used for almost every textile that touched the human body, including underwear, hair coverings, napkins, towels, and bedsheets. In contrast, outer garments made of wool, being difficult to wash without shrinking or felting, were rarely laundered. Instead, they were typically shaken or beaten with a brush or bundle of twigs to remove dust and dirt, and then simply reworn. The role of laundresses in medieval society was crucial. Laundry was predominantly women's work, and the laborious nature of the task often transformed it into a social event, providing a valuable opportunity for women to exchange news, information, and gossip. Wealthy households and monasteries employed dedicated laundresses and their teams, who were responsible for ensuring that all clothes, sheets, towels, and tablecloths were meticulously cleaned. The social position of laundresses varied significantly, ranging from highly paid employees in royal households to low-status workers who often formed mutual aid networks. The work itself was incredibly hard and fraught with dangers, including exposure to cold, risks from polluted rivers, and even the possibility of falling into vats of boiling water. This demonstrates the social and gendered division of hygienic labour. Laundry was unquestionably women's work and a community event. Laundresses were a recognised profession. This indicates that hygiene maintenance was not an individual burden, but a collective, often gender-specific societal responsibility. The social aspect of laundry provided a space for community interaction and information exchange, while the existence of professional laundresses highlights the economic value placed on this arduous task. This reveals a structured social system where hygiene was maintained through a division of labour, underscoring the communal nature of medieval life. The economic and environmental interdependence of laundry practices is also noteworthy. Laundry was often performed in rivers that also served as sewers and relied on natural cleaning agents like urine and lye. Drying was entirely dependent on the weather. This highlights how deeply integrated medieval laundry practices were with the natural environment and resource availability. The use of rivers, despite their contamination, was a practical necessity due to the lack of piped water. The reliance on natural cleaning agents and weather for drying underscores the absence of industrial infrastructure and the direct impact of environmental conditions on daily hygiene. This illustrates a pre-industrial system where hygiene was inherently tied to and limited by natural cycles and readily available, though often unpleasant, resources. At the heart of medieval medical science, and consequently its influence on hygiene practices, lay the humoral theory. This ancient system, systematized by Hippocrates and Galen and further developed by Arab physicians, was the dominant framework for understanding human health and disease in the 13th century. The theory posited that health was maintained by the delicate balance of four fundamental humours within the human body: blood, which was considered warm and wet, corresponding to air; yellow bile, warm and dry, akin to fire; black bile, cold and dry, like earth; and phlegm, cold and wet, correlating with water. Illness, including parasitic infestations, was believed to be a direct result of an imbalance in these humours. For instance, it was thought that sweet meats engender watery blood, and that engenders worms. The theory extended its influence to temperament. The properties of bodily organs, for example, the heart was considered warm, the brain cold, and even changes in the body due to age or environment, older bodies becoming colder and drier, women possessing colder and wetter properties than men. Furthermore, 6 external factors: air, food, excretion, exercise, sleep, and emotion were believed to profoundly influence the flow and balance of these vital humours. This establishes humoral theory as the scientific justification for hygiene practices. The fear of hot water opening pores, and the belief that sweating purged bad humours are directly tied to humoral theory. This theory also dictated the use of specific herbs and spices in baths and remedies. This indicates a fundamental causal link. Medieval hygiene was not random or ignorant, but a rational system based on the best available scientific understanding of the time. The practices, even those we now know to be ineffective, were logical within their medical framework. This shifts the narrative from lack of hygiene to hygiene based on a different scientific paradigm, highlighting the intellectual effort behind their practices. Hygiene practices were deeply rooted in these humoral beliefs. The widespread fear that hot water opened the pores and thus allowed illness to seep in was a direct application of humoral theory, leading to a general apprehension of frequent bathing and a preference for staying dry. Similarly, sweating was often viewed as a healthy and natural way to purge bad humours from the body, making the act of blocking sweat seem suspicious or even dangerous. Consequently, body odour was often perceived as medically fragrant rather than simply unclean, a sign that the body was properly cleansing itself. Treatments for various ailments, including those related to hygiene, were designed to restore humoral balance. This involved methods such as extracting excess humours through bloodletting or purgatives, or neutralising them with medicines possessing opposing properties. Asian spices, being predominantly warm and dry in their perceived humoral qualities, were highly valued in medieval medicine for their ability to balance cold and wet conditions, profoundly influencing their use in remedies, aromatic baths, and even beauty treatments. The sensory experience of medieval Europe was indeed distinct. It smelled committed. characterized by a complex combination of sweat, animals, rotting food, and a peculiar underlying optimism. Without modern sewage systems or the benefit of widespread deodorant, the average street and person carried a distinct aroma. Despite this pervasive olfactory backdrop, medieval people were far from oblivious to smells. They noticed them keenly and ascribed profound moral dimensions to them. Foul odours were consistently associated with disease, low social standing, and moral corruption, while sweet smells were linked to holiness and purity. Body odour was not merely a possibility, it was, in a sense, an identity. People simply sweated and, for the most part, made peace with it, or at least attempted to mask it. This suggests a social negotiation of body odour. While medieval cities stank, there were extensive efforts to mask and manage personal and environmental smells. Foul odours were associated with disease and moral corruption. This indicates that despite the pervasive background odours, there was a societal expectation of managing personal scent, especially among the elite. The widespread use of pomanders and perfumes points to a conscious effort to navigate the olfactory landscape. This reveals a complex social dynamic where body odour was a recognised issue, leading to a cultural negotiation between natural bodily emissions, environmental factors, and a desire for more pleasant or virtuous smells. It was not about eliminating odour, but about controlling its social impact. To manage and mask these pervasive odours, people employed a variety of techniques. Pomanders, small hollow balls filled with aromatic herbs and spices, such as cloves, cinnamon, lavender, musk, and sometimes ambergris, a highly prized substance derived from whale intestines, were worn to politely overpower the surrounding filth. Scented sachets were commonly worn in bodices or tucked into clothing, filled with fragrant mixtures like lemon balm and dried rose petals. Herbal applications were also widespread. Herbs like rosemary or marjoram were braided directly into hair, and individuals might apply alum powder, a mineral salt with mild antibacterial properties, chalk, vinegar rinses, or crushed sage, mint, and rosemary to their bodies. For the elite, imported perfumes from the Middle East or Italy, crafted from rose oil or civet, were applied by dabbing. Later, with the advent of alcohol distillation in the early 1300s, influenced by Arab practices, lighter, alcohol-based perfumes like Queen of Hungary Water, a blend of rosemary and alcohol emerged, used for rubbing on the body to protect against infections. Additionally, dusting powders made from ground rice, orris root known for its violet scent, and fragranced with cloves or lavender were applied to the body after drying. These diverse methods were not designed to stop sweat, but rather to manage the accompanying stench, aiming to achieve a more agreeable floral stew meat aroma rather than simply stew meat. This highlights the economic and global dimensions of scent management. Imported perfumes from the Middle East and Italy were luxury goods, and Asian spices were valued for their medicinal properties and mystique. The development of alcohol distillation for perfumes was influenced by Arab practices. This shows that medieval hygiene, particularly in the realm of scent, was not isolated but connected to global trade networks and the exchange of knowledge. The desire for pleasant smells and effective remedies drove demand for exotic ingredients, influencing economic patterns and cultural exchange. This demonstrates that hygiene was not just a local affair, but had broader economic and cultural implications, reflecting a sophisticated, interconnected world. Sleep in the Middle Ages was often a communal experience, a stark contrast to the private bedrooms and individual slumber we cherish today. The average person, particularly those residing in a one-room cottage, would sleep crammed together on thin woven mats or mattresses stuffed with readily available materials like wool, hay, or moss. Even in wealthier homes, a degree of privacy was limited. A true bed with drawn curtains was an expensive luxury, often passed down through generations. In such households, the entire family might sleep together in one large bed, with servants sleeping nearby on straw mats. It was also common for guests of the household to be invited to share the bed. This communal sleeping arrangement was a societal norm, driven partly by the lack of dedicated private spaces and the practical need for shared warmth in often drafty dwellings. This illustrates sleep as a communal and adaptive experience, shaped by environment and resources. Snippets highlight communal sleeping, the use of basic bedding materials, and the challenges of warmth and pests. The biphasic sleep pattern is also noted, This indicates that medieval sleep was not a private, uninterrupted act, but a highly social and adaptive one. The lack of individual rooms, the need for shared warmth, and the constant presence of pests forced communal arrangements. The biphasic sleep pattern was a natural adaptation to the absence of artificial light, transforming the night into a segmented period of rest and activity. This illustrates how fundamental human behaviors like sleep were profoundly shaped by the technological and environmental constraints of the era. Early beds were simple piles of straw, leaves, or animal skins laid directly on the ground. These materials were plentiful and easily replaced as needed. Over time, more structured beds emerged, with large fabric bags, known as ticks, being filled with various materials like straw, wool flocking, or feathers. While wealthier individuals enjoyed the comfort of feather beds and pillows, along with fur coverlets, these softer, warmer materials were unfortunately equally attractive to pests. A significant factor contributing to persistent pest problems was that bed filling was typically changed only once a year, providing ample opportunity for infestations to thrive and multiply. To combat dampness and pests, beds were sometimes elevated on wooden or stone frames, lifting the sleeping surface off the cold, potentially damp floor. Curtains around beds, particularly in wealthier homes, provided a degree of visual privacy and, crucially, helped to trap warmth within the sleeping area. This reveals the hidden hygiene of bedding and nightly rituals. While full body bathing was infrequent, bed filling was changed yearly, and methods to combat pests in bedding ticking, herbs, cedar chests were employed. Chamber pots were used and their contents often recycled. This indicates that hygiene extended beyond the body and clothing to the sleeping environment. Despite the challenges, efforts were made to manage pests and waste associated with beds. The recycling of urine from chamber pots highlights a practical, resource-conscious approach to waste management, even in the context of personal bodily functions. This shows that medieval people had a broader, albeit different, understanding of cleanliness that encompassed their living spaces. The presence of pests in medieval homes was a constant reality. Fleas, lice, and other biting insects were frequent and unwelcome guests, plaguing commoners and kings alike. The close proximity inherent in communal sleeping arrangements regrettably facilitated the easy spread of these parasites among occupants. To combat pests within bedding, various strategies were employed. Tightly woven mattress covers, known as ticking, were used. Insect repellent herbs, such as cedarwood, were placed within or around bedding, and storing bedding in cedar chests was a common practice. Some individuals believed that certain smells actively repelled pests, leading to the practice of tossing herbal sachets filled with aromatic plants between sheets. The psychological impact of these constant companions, while not as dramatic as the widespread terror of the Black Death, was a pervasive, low-level torment that significantly affected comfort and overall well-being. The incessant itching and crawling sensations would have contributed to chronic discomfort and disrupted sleep quality. This points to the psychological impact of shared spaces and unseen companions. The constant presence of lice and fleas in bedding and the communal nature of sleeping imply a psychological reality of constant, low-level discomfort and lack of privacy. The ability to endure these conditions speaks to a societal resilience and a different cultural understanding of personal boundaries and physical sensations, which is crucial for truly understanding the medieval experience. Maintaining warmth and comfort during the night was a significant challenge. A fireplace was often the only source of heat in a medieval home. In peasant dwellings, this might be an open hearth situated in the centre of the room, which, once doors and shutters were closed for the night, often led to smoky and poorly ventilated conditions. Heavy rains could drip through thatched roofs, and wind might whistle noisily through walls and windows, further adding to the discomfort of the sleeping environment. For additional warmth, hot stones or bed warmers, filled with hot coals from the fire, might be placed beneath the blankets to pre-warm the bed. It was also common for everyone to sleep with a head covering for added warmth, and women frequently braided or tied up their hair before bed. Sleeping attire varied widely based on means, personal preferences, and the time of year. Some individuals slept nude, while others wore simple gowns, shirts, or even their daily underclothes. Nightshirts and nightgowns became more common by the late Middle Ages. For nighttime necessities, both the wealthy and the poor relied on chamber pots, avoiding the inconvenient and often cold trips to outdoor privies in the dark. These portable pots were typically emptied in the morning, with their contents often destined for common dung heaps, cesspools, or, famously, thrown out of windows into the street below. Interestingly, urine collected in these chamber pots was not merely waste. It had various practical uses, including for cleaning, sterilizing wounds and tools, and for industrial processes such as fulling wool. To mitigate the unpleasant odors, a chair with a hole in the seat and a cover might be placed over the chamber pot. A fascinating aspect of medieval sleep was the prevalent biphasic or segmented sleep pattern. Rather than a single continuous stretch of sleep, people would typically sleep for a few hours, then wake up for a period, often lasting 1 to 2 hours, before returning for a morning sleep. This waking period was utilized for a variety of activities: chatting quietly with bedmates, working by moonlight or candlelight for those who could afford it, engaging in prayer and meditation, or even for sexual activity, which was considered a particularly good time for conception. This segmented sleep pattern was largely influenced by the lack of artificial lighting, meaning that the onset of darkness naturally brought an end to most daytime activities, allowing for this midnight interlude. The journey through medieval hygiene in the 1200s reveals a reality far more complex and adaptive than commonly imagined. The pervasive myth of a universally filthy Middle Ages is largely dispelled by evidence showcasing a society that, while lacking modern scientific understanding and infrastructure, actively pursued cleanliness and managed waste within its means. The sensory landscape of a medieval town was undeniably different, characterized by a unique blend of natural and industrial odors. However, this was not a passively accepted stench. The widespread belief in the miasma theory, which linked foul smells to disease, provided a powerful, albeit misinformed, impetus for sanitation efforts. This fundamental understanding drove regulations, the employment of muckrakers, and the strategic placement of industries to mitigate offensive odors. Smell, therefore, functioned not just as a physical sensation, but as a complex social and moral indicator, influencing perceptions of status, virtue, and health. The extensive use of pomanders, herbal remedies, and early perfumes underscores a conscious societal effort to manage personal and environmental scent, revealing a sophisticated cultural negotiation of body odor and a connection to broader trade networks for exotic aromatics. Bathing practices in the 13th century were diverse and varied significantly across social classes. While the Roman tradition of public baths initially thrived, a shift occurred by the 1200s, driven by a humoral theory that viewed hot water as dangerous and religious doctrines that condemned mixed-gender bathing and associated immorality. This led to a decline in full-body immersion, but not an abandonment of cleanliness. Instead, people adapted to partial sponge baths and relied heavily on the linen revolution. Linen undergarments became the unsung heroes of medieval hygiene, absorbing sweat and grime, allowing for frequent changes of clothing rather than frequent full-body washes. This pragmatic approach to hygiene highlights a resourceful adaptation to resource constraints and prevailing medical beliefs, where clean clothes became a primary social signal of presentability. The economic and logistical challenges of heating and transporting water further shaped these practices, favouring communal facilities and resource-efficient methods. Oral hygiene, though rudimentary by modern standards, was also practiced. People used abrasive cloths, chewing sticks, and herbal pastes to clean their teeth and freshen breath. The prevalent toothworm theory influenced remedies and dental extractions, often performed by barber surgeons without anaesthetic, were a brutal last resort. This period illustrates a paradox. A diet low in processed sugar often resulted in healthier teeth than later eras, yet the lack of advanced dental tools meant that when problems arose, the experience was intensely painful and risky, underscoring the significant psychological burden of dental ailments. The daily reality included constant companionship with pests like lice, fleas, and mites. These unwanted roommates were a fact of life across all social strata. While medieval people believed these parasites spontaneously generated, they employed ingenious methods for detection and removal, including fine-toothed combs, heat treatments for clothing, and herbal repellents. This widespread acceptance of pests, coupled with persistent efforts to manage them, reflects a societal adaptation to an inescapable problem, highlighting both resilience and resourcefulness in the face of persistent discomfort. Toilet facilities and waste disposal methods were equally varied and challenging. From castle garderobes to rural outdoor practices and urban public latrines, solutions were often improvisational. Chamber pots were ubiquitous, their contents often emptied into cesspits or, notoriously, out of windows, despite regulations and fines. Waste management was a constant battle between burgeoning urban populations and limited infrastructure. Yet, waste was also a valuable resource, recycled as fertilizer or for industrial uses, demonstrating a pre-industrial circular economy. The quality and privacy of toilet facilities were clear indicators of social status, revealing how even fundamental human needs were stratified by hierarchy. Finally, medieval sleeping arrangements were largely communal, influenced by the need for warmth and the absence of private spaces. Beds were often shared, and bedding, though changed infrequently, was subject to pest management efforts. The fascinating practice of biphasic sleep, a natural adaptation to the lack of artificial light, transformed the night into segmented periods of rest and activity. This highlights how deeply fundamental human behaviors were shaped by the technological and environmental realities of the era. In essence, medieval hygiene was not a story of neglect, but one of remarkable adaptation, resourcefulness, and a distinct understanding of cleanliness shaped by prevailing medical theories, religious doctrines, and the practical constraints of daily life in the 13th century. It was a system that, while imperfect by modern standards, allowed a complex society to function, demonstrating an enduring human drive for order and well-being in a world profoundly different from our own. Thank you for spending this quiet moment with the Midnight Historian. If tonight's story helped you find calm, please consider subscribing to join us again under the stars. Leave a like or a gentle comment. It helps these peaceful tales reach others who need rest. Until next time, sleep well, dream deep, and let the echoes of the past lull you into peace.